welcome. Thank you all for joining us with our crime prevention monthly meeting. We've been doing these meetings since the beginning of the pandemic as a way to reach out to the public and connect with you all. Of course, we miss seeing your lovely faces in person, but we want to keep everybody as safe as possible. So this is a way for us to be able to connect with everyone today. Very happy to have everybody on board today. All my panelists and the chief, you can feel free to turn on your cameras now. Thank you. So today's subject for crime prevention is going to be chat with the chief, and the chief actually has brought her command staff with her so that they can also be available to answer questions that you might have. And we took questions from you that you want to have answered in this particular session, and we'll be reading them so that they can answer. If you have other questions that you want follow up to, feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll try to answer them as much as we can. If we're not able all to answer them on air, we'll be able to follow up with you because most of you registered, so we'll be able to get that information to you. My name is Michelle Milam. I'm Crime Prevention Manager for the Richmond Police Department. And so I'm gonna go over a little bit of the format and some of the groundwork on getting started today, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chief French. So today we had 50 people registered for the webinar. So wanted to also let you all know that the webinar is going to be broadcast on KCRT TV if you're interested in catching it at a later time or someone didn't get a chance to connect. So we'll continue to do that so more people can connect and get a chance to see this if they didn't get to chime in on the Zoom. And the other thing is that we'll have an opening introduction by Chief French where she'll kind of overlay some of the things she wants to share with you. And then there'll be some time for Q&A. So that's the way that's gonna go. It's gonna really try to go with the flow. Thank you all for sending in your questions. And I'm gonna try to get to as many questions as I possibly can. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Chief French.
All right, good afternoon, or I guess early evening, everyone. So the purpose of this town hall is really to provide you all with as much information as possible as it relates to the police department and our staffing and considerations for the future. This presentation will be similar to the staffing presentation given to the City Council last month. So as we continue to figure out how to provide the best level of service as possible while dealing with the pandemic, as well as reimagining policing in this era of reform, I want to hear from our community about what your expectations are as they relate to policing. In order for the conversation to be productive, I thought it would be helpful for us to present what our staffing and services look like at this point. And I say at this point because our staffing today looks very different than it did several years ago. As you know, as many of you may know, the City of Richmond has been facing major budget challenges over the past few years. This year we added complications of COVID, which has additionally negatively impacted the city budget. After a very difficult budget process, the City Council adopted a balanced budget in late June. This budget reduced the police department's budget by 10%, which included reductions in services as well as 34 positions within the police department. This was a very difficult loss for us because we had already been struggling with staffing challenges. Over the last 10 years, we've gone from having 301 employees to our current number of 217 employees. These incremental reductions created a situation in which staff were forced to work overtime, mandatory overtime, just to meet minimum staffing requirements so that when you guys call 911, there was a person there on the other end to answer the phone and an officer to respond. This mandatory overtime caused fatigue, added stress to our staff and their families, and contributed to low morale issues within the department. To address these issues for our sworn staff, we underwent a department reorganization at the beginning of this year. We focused on our patrol deployment and made it a priority to meet the minimum staffing requirements mandated by the department policy without having to use mandatory overtime on a daily basis. In order to do this, we had to suspend several units and reduce staffing in our investigations bureau. Additionally, we restructured our management responsibilities so that there was a more linear chain of command for accountability purposes. Rather than having 3 captains assigned to patrol with collateral responsibilities for other units, each of the 3 captains now have responsibility for each of the 3 bureaus within the department. To address the staffing for non-sworn employees, we focused a lot on our recruiting efforts on filling these positions, and we're able to fill many of the vacancies. So now I have 3 captains here with me so that they can discuss the staffing in each of their bureaus and the impacts the reductions in staffing had to their units. I'll start with Captain Tyrona.
Good afternoon. My name is Louis Tyrona. I'm the captain over the administrative division. So the administrative division covers 4 primary parts of the police department, to include personnel and training, our dispatcher communication center, records, property and evidence, and our information technology. The responsibilities for each unit, I'll go through this relatively quickly, but personnel and training is responsible for hiring and recruiting, equipment purchasing and inventory, compliance with mandated audits, both state and federal, and a continuous training program for all of our employees. That's comprised of 1 lieutenant, 1 sergeant, and 2 officers. And then we also have responsibility over our department temporary holding facility, which is our temporary jail facility. And that's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation. Again, it has to maintain compliance with federal and state mandates. They're also responsible for prisoner transportation, and the personnel are comprised of 1 officer and 6 jailers. The second part of our responsibility involves dispatch or communications. So they're usually the first step the public meets when they're requesting assistance from either police or fire or medical assistance. Our dispatch staff is a 24-hour operation, and they're responsible for dispatching police and fire, as well as conducting emergency medical dispatching. And the personnel assigned to the communication center is comprised of 1 manager, 4 shift supervisors, and currently 13 dispatchers. And then our next section is our records and property evidence unit. So records is responsible for 24-hour operations, complying with state and federal mandates for reporting and auditing, sexual offender registration, subpoena services, misdemeanor case preparation, and discovery requests. And they're comprised of 1 manager, 9 record specialists, and 1 court liaison specialist. The property and evidence unit are responsible for maintaining all of the property and evidence that is collected in the course of our duties. They're also responsible for submitting evidence for testing and responsible for the chain of custody for that evidence and property. And they are comprised of 2 property technicians, which are professional staff, non-sworn. And finally, our information technologies section is responsible for implementing, developing, maintaining our department's unique information infrastructure. The police department requires specialized computer systems, mobile data computers for the vehicles, as well as other mobile computers, our CCTV system, and have to maintain compliance with the state and federal mandates. Personnel assigned to that section are 1 supervisor, 2 network specialists, 1 systems administrator, and 1 CCTV specialist. This is probably the more interesting part of this for most of you, which is comparing what staffing looked like and what it looks like now. Not a lot of change in personnel and training. We're running primarily with the same numbers, with the exception of we used to have 2 administrative aides who were responsible for quite a bit of duties. Those duties were assumed by sworn personnel. Our temporary holding facility previously had 8 jailers and now has 1 officer and 6 jailers. Our communication center used to be comprised of 1 manager, 4 supervisors, and 21 dispatchers. Now it's down to 1 manager, 4 supervisors, 13 dispatchers, and 1 call taker. In our records, property, and evidence section, previously it was 1 supervisor, 11 record specialists, 1 court liaison officer, 1 court liaison specialist, and 3 property technicians. And now it's comprised of 1 supervisor / manager, 9 record specialists, 1 court liaison specialist, and 2 property technicians. One thing to note is that we conducted a study of our current personnel, and within the next 3 to 4 years, we're expecting about a 44% attrition rate, meaning personnel, employees who will be eligible to leave due to retirement. And not to mention the fact that we have had a string of employees leave for other departments, depending based on their own individual preferences. That's where we are right now with our administrative division, and I think I can turn it over to the patrol captain, Captain Y.A.
Hello, everyone. I'm Al White. I'm the Operations Bureau Commander, which is comprised of the Patrol Division and Traffic and Special Events Division. If you move over to the next slide, please, and just hold there. I'll talk about this more in detail, but I want you to pay particular attention to the trend line, and that is the officers that we've had in the department in the past decade. This graph here is a comparison between the population, our calls for service, and our patrol staffing levels in the last decade. Next slide, please. So in the past decade, city's population has increased by 4.7%. Our calls for service have remained steady. A number of patrol officers have decreased by 25%. We currently have about 61 officers in the patrol division, although currently our school resource officers are there on a temporary basis. We try to deal with all these calls for service and the limited amount of officers by really taking a data-driven approach to addressing crime. So it's very important that we always keep up on crime statistics, always keep up on what neighbors are seeing in order to be able to apply the appropriate resources in the right locations. And our officers not only just tasked with responding to calls for service, part of our culture that we've been working on for the past 25 years here is to be really community problem solvers. Next slide, please. So as Captain Trent did, I also wanted to include a staffing comparison from 2011 to 2020. So we went from patrol captains from 3 to 1, patrol lieutenants from 6 to 5, patrol sergeants from 13 to 9, patrol officers from 82 to 54, and our bicycle officer program has actually been eliminated, and those officers have been reassigned to different parts of the department. Next slide. So our team deployment, we obviously deploy 24/7 in 5 teams across 9 policing beats in the city. The officers during the week will work 10-hour shifts, and the officers on the weekend work 12.5-hour shifts. Average about 13 officers per patrol team. And as I said before, our 6th patrol team was eliminated, which was the weekend swing shift team due to staffing shortages. So currently we don't have a weekend swing shift team. The day shift team comes on. They have a little overlap with the graveyard team, and then they're gone. So there's not a whole lot of overlap there. Next slide. So going back to our core policing philosophy is community problem solving. So in traditional law enforcement agencies, someone would call the police, the officers respond, they either make an arrest or they say it's not their problem and they refer you to another agency. Our philosophy here in Richmond is solve problems. We know that there's not a whole lot of other social services agencies that you can call at 3 in the morning. So we'll try to address crime patterns, neighborhood problems. Currently, we have 31 beat projects in the city, which aren't really traditional law enforcement problems, but we try to work with other stakeholders, other government agencies, nonprofits to solve these problems. Some of these beat projects are drug houses, homelessness, noise complaints, abandoned cars, nuisance neighbors, speeding, drug dealing, loitering, sideshows, illegal parking, trespassing, health order violations, and abandoned buildings. While some of these responses may be law enforcement related, we know that we can't solve a lot of these problems on our own. So our officers really work with a lot of other agencies and other providers in order to solve these problems. So you won't have to keep calling the police back. Next slide. So the current challenges that we have now, the elimination of the weekend patrol team increases our cost for overtime for training. As Captain Trent talked about, there's mandatory training that we have to do that's state mandated. So there's a team right now during the week, or weekday swing shift team has to do all their training on overtime. Our Bravo teams, the bicycle officers that you'd see a lot of times on 23rd Street, we would also use those for other special projects throughout the department. So with the loss of the Bravo team, we have less agility for hotspot crime suppression. So whenever we see either a say a robbery, a trend, a shooting trend, sideshow trend, we have to actually pull officers from different parts of the department in order to address these issues. Another problem is we have long weekend shifts. These officers are working 12.5-hour shifts. They're going to court during the week. We're seeing an increase sick leave usage during the weekends. With less overlap days, because we don't have that we eliminated that one patrol team. We don't have we have less time for quality of life projects. And normally on the overlap days, if the officers were not doing mandated training, they would use that day to actually go out there and solve quality of life issues. Right now, we have a high service demand from that previous chart that you saw. Our calls for service have not actually decreased. They've remained steady. As our population increases, so do our calls for service. And right now, with our reduced staffing levels, it's resulting in longer response times. And that typically is the biggest complaint that I see in the Operations Bureau, are citizens complaining about the response time. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Captain Timothy Simmons, and I'm responsible for our Investigations Bureau. Our Investigations Bureau consists of all of our criminal investigation sections, which is our Homicide Unit, our Robbery Unit, our Property Crimes Unit, and our Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Unit. In addition to that, in the Bureau, we also house our Special Investigations Section, which is responsible for maintaining investigations on all of our gang violence, illegal narcotic sales, and transportation within the city, as well as maintaining an awareness and being responsible for sharing responsibility for parole and probationers that are paroled or assigned to the city of Richmond. The first slide that you're going to see next is an overview of what our previous and current staffing levels look like, just kind of at a glance. I'm not going to go through each one of these for the sake of time, but if you'll just note the very bottom, over the last 7 years or so, we've taken an overall 36% reduction in the staffing levels within our criminal investigations and special investigations sections. We've had reductions in supervisors, reductions in management, and reductions in investigators overall. Next slide. A little bit about what some of these units do. Our Homicide Unit is responsible to investigate all homicides, all attempt homicides and shootings. They process all homicide scenes, identify and collect evidence. They maintain consistent, regular contact with victims' families, at least that's our hope. They continue to investigate cold cases when time permits. They maintain and review current information with the Contra Costa County Crime Lab. They also investigate all officer-involved critical incidences that occur in our city. So if one of our officers gets involved in a critical incident, or an outside agency has an officer in our city that gets involved in a critical incident, our Homicide Unit is responsible for conducting that investigation. This unit is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year. Next slide. The impact to our Homicide Unit. So we've actually taken about a 50% reduction in homicide investigators. Previously, we've had approximately 10 and 8 with 2 supervisors. Now we have 4 with 1 supervisor. So because of that reduction, cold case murder investigations, they struggle. We don't have as much time to get the cold cases out and reinvigorate a case that we may be able to generate new leads on, because detectives are currently handling their current caseload of active homicide investigations. Another impact to our homicide team is that it can be difficult to maintain contact with victims' families. Due to the demand of current caseloads, oftentimes detectives are unable to maintain what is a satisfactory level of contact with the families, both by our standards and by the standards of the surviving victims' families. And then the last impact there is the diminished team investigation approach. Best practice, and ideally, is that homicide detectives will work in teams. However, due to the current caseloads of each detective, personnel are most oftentimes left to investigate a homicide on their own, utilizing other resources as they can, but they are the lead investigator solo. Next slide. The next unit within our criminal investigation section is our robbery and assault unit. They're responsible for investigating all robberies. That includes our strong arm robberies, our armed robberies, home invasion robberies, and our carjackings. They also investigate all felonious assaults, which are assaults with deadly weapons, assaults that create great bodily injury, and all of our hate crimes. And because of the diminished resource in our homicide unit, they are on a regular basis are assisting our homicide investigators with call-outs and the needs in the homicide unit. They are also on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year. Next slide. With the reduced staffing, we typically have had 4 detectives and a supervisor in this unit. We're down to 3 detectives and a supervisor. So each robbery detective's caseload, because of that reduction, has increased significantly, with a priority focus on in-custody cases. Cold case investigations receive minimal to no attention, and investigative follow-ups on non-in-custody cases are minimized, or they're investigated with less of a priority, because our focus is always on cases that we have that are with an in-custody. I mean, somebody's been arrested, so that we can work to hold them accountable for the crime. And then special operations designed to identify, interdict, and apprehend serial robbers or impact hotspots are diminished. We oftentimes like to use the robbery unit to put special operations together, like around the BART station and other locations where we have a high frequency of robberies, so that we can impact those while they're happening. And without the personnel, we just can't do those. We can't safely do them, and we don't have the manpower to do them. Next slide. The next unit in our criminal investigations section is our property crimes unit. They have a big job also. They are responsible for investigating all property related crimes. So this includes all of our residential burglaries, commercial burglaries, felony vandalism, stolen vehicles, all of our fraud cases, computer related crimes, financial crimes, grand theft, embezzlement, plus others that did not make this list. Next slide. The impact of our reduced staffing. Now, fortunately, we've been able to maintain, for the most part, a consistent staffing level in our property unit, although we have lost, over the 7 years, we've lost 2 detectives. And with the loss of those 2 detectives, we no longer have a dedicated detective investigating computer-related crimes, and we no longer have a detective dedicated to investigating fraud or finance-related elder abuse crimes. Those were 2 specialties that have now been folded up and rolled into the generalist investigations of a property crime investigator. Cold case investigations receive minimal to no attention, and then investigative follow-up on non-in-custody cases. It happens, but it's minimized. To give you an idea of the caseload of our 4 property crimes detectives, on average, they manage about 1,700 property crime cases each per year. So priority obviously is going to be given to the in-custody cases, or cases where we have significant leads, because there's only so much time in a day, so much time in a week, and so they dedicate their time to those cases. Next slide. The next unit is our domestic and sexual assault violence unit. They are all housed at the Family Justice Center, which is off-site from the police department. They are responsible for investigating all domestic violence related incidences and crimes. They investigate all sexual assaults, all physical elder abuse incidents, all human trafficking incidents, and that includes pimping and pandering, victim rescue, prostitution interdiction. They investigate crimes against children, and they work directly with victim advocates, which, like I said, are housed at the Family Justice Center. They are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year. Next slide. Impact to staffing here. Luckily, in this unit, staffing in this unit has remained steady with a minimal direct effect. However, based on the reduced staffing in the other investigative units, detectives from our DSVU unit are oftentimes called upon to assist in some of the more complex investigations that require more manpower. Usually that lies within our homicide unit. When this happens, that obviously develops a backlog within the DVSU unit where detectives can struggle to catch up on those cases, or overtime becomes required in order to get caught up on their own caseload. Next slide. The last unit within the Investigations Bureau is our Special Investigations section. They're responsible for conducting investigations associated with large-scale narcotic trafficking within the city, and also small-scale, so problem narcotic houses and things of that nature, community complaint homes that are related to narcotic usage. They conduct operations to impact open-air narcotic sales within the community. Investigations into criminal street gangs. They conduct investigations into the possession of illegal firearms within the city of Richmond, and with their primary mission being to reduce violence within the city of Richmond. They maintain a connection and accountability with parole persons in the city of Richmond to assist parole officers with parole compliance. They maintain connection and accountability with probationers to ensure probation status compliance. And they maintain a connection and accountability with registered sex offenders. They also will investigate all illegal marijuana cultivation sites. So all these residential marijuana grows, they will fall into the purview of Special Investigation section. Next slide. This unit has also been impacted significantly by reduced staffing. Based on, they are about a quarter of what they used to be. They used to be approximately 14 detectives, and we're down to 5. As a result, there's little to no follow-up with paroled persons, little to no follow-up with probationers, little to no follow-up with registered sex offenders. There's divided attention between firearms investigations, gang investigations, and narcotic investigations. They more or less have to triage what is spiking in the moment now, so they can address that. And then there's also an over-reliance on regional-based task force units to assist with the reducing violence in the city. And I'll just kind of leave it there because I know we're running short on time. And at this point, I will hand it back to Chief French.
Thank you. So there were a couple other impacts. Our CCTV program that we used to have, we no longer have. That has an impact on being able to catch people in real time. And I'm specifically talking about illegal dumping. I know that's a huge problem across town. We used to use our CCTV program operators will place cameras in hotspot areas for dumping, and they would watch, and we would do the operations where we can actually catch people in the process of illegal dumping, and we're no longer able to do that. And from the garbage that we see across the city, that our city is suffering because of that. Also, we lost a program through crime prevention that had been in existence for over 34 years, our TEX program, and that's a huge loss as we're no longer also in the schools. And so we're trying to figure out other ways to connect with young people and non-enforcement type activities. So the reason for this overview was to let you all see everything that we're tasked with. And as you can see, there's a lot of stuff that we're tasked with here at the police department. And I know that there are several groups working on recommendations to reimagine or defund the police department. So I also thought it was important for you all to see everything that we're responsible for doing, so that, you know, the recommendations can be informed with what our actual resources are. So our visions and next steps, the police department vision, first of all, is can you go back to our last slide? I'll put it up there. Basically, we want Richmond to be a safe place for people to live, work, and visit. And with this vision is the vision that we carry on with everything that we're doing in terms of reimagining policing and just how we're reorganizing the police department. So we want to do this in a way that is in line with our community's expectations of us. I know that there are several groups that are meeting to re-envision policing. We want to hear all those concerns and recommendations. That's okay, Mandy, you don't have to go back to it. In the meantime, we're also looking at ways that we can be more efficient and community-oriented, taking into consideration the resources that we have. So here are a few things that we're looking at in the future, and I won't go over a lot of them because I do want to allow time for question and answer. So we're looking at how to provide the best services in a way that the community expects of us. Community policing, we don't want to lose our momentum. So we are looking at how we could continue to do and be involved with the community as much as possible. However, with the staffing limitations and, this is a challenge for us. So a lot of people ask kind of why is overtime necessary to engage in a lot of community policing functions. And community policing is a philosophy that we carry throughout the police department. It's ingrained in everything that we do. So even as officers are responding to calls for services, they're doing so with the community policing vision in mind. And with that being said, we want to be able to respond to and be a part of a lot of non-enforcement interactions too. And those happened on the weekends with community events and block parties and all these other things that go on. And with COVID, I know that, we're not necessarily doing that right now, but with once we get past the pandemic, we want to get back to those activities. And so that's when a lot of times we bring in officers on overtime so that they could be dedicated to being at these functions and not have to worry about answering calls for service. Or, when we commit to being there, we want to make sure that an officer can respond. And if it's a beat officer, that officer might get tied up on a report or a case or, a homicide, whatever's happening on the streets, they might get tied up there and not be able to respond to the community events. And that's why a lot of people are, come in on overtime to do those duties. We don't have a group of officers that can be dedicated just for those functions. We're also continuing to look at the use of online reporting. This is difficult for me because I know that a lot of people don't call the police. So when you call the police, you want a police officer to respond. And when we're telling people, well, you got to go online to make a report, to me, that's just not the best use of service. However, with the staffing challenges we have, and especially during COVID, we are trying to utilize our online reporting mechanism as much as possible. We're looking at different programs across the country as we reimagine what policing can look like, and taking into consideration some of these calls that we respond to, like mental health calls and homeless calls that don't necessarily have great outcomes for us all the time. We're looking with partnering with different agencies that can respond to these calls. But what we're hearing, especially from mental health professionals who we've been engaged with and we have partnerships with, is that they still want us to respond. So we're looking at a partnership where we can respond with them, but we'll take more of a support role rather than the more active role. I'm looking at creating a Chiefs Advisory Committee. So I'm going to be soliciting community members to apply for my advisory committee, where I will present different issues, policies, and get the input from the community from this advisory committee. And then we're also looking at additional cultural competency training. So we're looking at additional implicit bias, procedural justice, and really looking at how we can integrate our officers more with our Richmond community, talking about and exploring the history of police community relationships, because I think if you better understand the history, they'll understand some of the challenges that we have responding now with our community and how we can make those interactions better. So I'll stop right there. There was another list, but I do want to get to the question and answer. So I'll turn it back over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Chief. So there were a lot of things going on in the chat, and I wanted to make sure that people know that this broadcast is being recorded. So if you want to go back and replay it and take a look at it, just give us a day or so. KCRT will edit it so we can edit out the beginning of it that just had blank screen, and we'll be able to send it to you, and it will go up on the city's website so you all can share it. And then the other question that was asked is, can we share a copy of the PowerPoint and the presentation? And so we'll work with you to try to get that information out to people. If you've registered, we already have your emails. If you're not registered, you can email us at rpdcommunity@richmondpd.net. And Mandy can drop it into the chat, and we'll be free to send that information to you if you're interested in that. So I wanted to make sure we had enough time to get to questions, because I know that there are a lot of questions that were sent in. And so I'm going to go ahead and read through some of them. So the first one comes from Audrey, and Audrey asks, or says, thank you for creating this forum for us to be able to connect with your officers. With the current focus that we have and the spotlight on police departments, we already see what's going on in our country today and yesterday and throughout this week. What can we do to support your priorities going forward? What are the top priorities of your administration as you assume this new position? And that's directed to Chief French.
Great question. So I think the best thing to do to support us is to let us hear what our community is actually asking for us. So, you know, we have groups that are pushing to defund, and I get that. But we are also hearing a lot from our community, our neighborhood communities, about the lack of resources, the lack of officers. We get complaints all the time about traffic and just different issues across the city. And so I think that in some aspect, we are community divided, where there are a lot of people pushing to defund and not have as many officers. But then we have also a large portion of our community that's pushing for more officers and more better response times, and for us to be able to take up some of the issues that they are experiencing in their communities. So I think that hearing from you will help inform where we can go as a department and which direction we're going to be able to go. And also, of course, our staffing and resources is also going to inform that decision, because we can only do so much with the resources that we have. My vision, again, is to make this a safe place for everybody. And to do that, we have to make sure that we're providing police services in a way that our community is asking us to provide those. And so over the next few months, we'll continue to listen. We'll continue to adjust our policies and procedures in a way that are reflective of what the community wants of us. We're here to serve the community.
Thank you very much, Chief. I really appreciate that. And that's a question I think we're all asking, is how do we figure out what this looks like and how the community can weigh in so that we can shape a common vision. So thank you for that. The next question comes from Carol. And Carol is asking, what does RPD do to discipline officers that may have numerous complaints or unprofessional experiences or use of excessive force in their files? And what is the way that we handle that through the hiring process and also through the disciplinary process? And so, Chief, I'll direct that to you, but you can also direct it to anyone else on the panel.
So we have mechanisms in place to really focus on officers that we see are engaged in activity that we don't want them to be engaged in. So we have early warning system, where if they're using force at a rate that's different from other officers, or if we see more force, then we have early intervention systems where we can see what's going on. We can evaluate each case to make sure it was necessary, legal, and ethical, and we'll address those officers in that way. In terms of discipline, if we see something that's not in line with our policies or our procedures, we send those cases to our Office of Professional Accountability, which is typically known as IA in other departments. And those things are investigated and will come out with a finding. And if the officer was out of line with the policy, then those officers will get disciplined. Due to privacy rights, we can't discuss all of those discipline measures, but we try to be as transparent as possible and talk about what we do in those particular cases. We also post online all of the complaints that we receive from the community. Actually, most of the complaints that we investigate are internally generated. They're not generated by the public. We do get some public complaints and we investigate those too, but most of our complaints are actually internally driven. That means that, you know, we review all use of force cases every month. All the captains that are on this call, they have a monthly meeting that where they review all of the uses of force. And if they see anything that's out of policy, then those cases go for investigation and we deal with them in that way.
Thank you, Chief.
Captains want to chime in on that one. Okay, we'll move on.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, and there's several questions that are centered around mental health. And so this one comes from LaShawn, and she says many departments around the country comment that they aren't able or capable of handling issues like mental illness or someone who is a mental health consumer. Are there any current activities in the department that RPD does or is expected to do, or maybe things that we do differently or better than other places elsewhere? Maybe we'll leave it at that. She had some follow-up questions, but let's start off with that mental health piece.
So all of our officers are trained in crisis intervention training, and we made sure that this happened a couple years ago, where all officers, they get crisis intervention training in the academy, but yet also when they come to our department, we provide additional crisis intervention training, and that's to specifically deal with the mentally ill. We also have a program called the MHET program, Mental Health Evaluation Team, where we have an officer that's assigned with a clinician to respond to people actually when they're not in crisis. So if one of our officers deals with somebody who's in crisis and we might have to send them to the hospital, we refer that person also to our mental health officer, who later visits that person and make sure that they're getting the resources that they need, that they're taking the proper medications, that they're going to mental health appointments, and we try to keep them on the right track so that we're not responding only in crisis situations. He builds a rapport and relationship with a lot of people in the community. They have a cell phone number and call him directly when they feel like they're going into crisis. And so that's helped us reduce our the amount of calls that we've had to respond to, patrol officers have to respond to on a daily basis. Captains?
Additionally, we have a core team that is dedicated to Richmond, San Pablo. So core is a countywide team that addresses the needs of mentally ill and homeless. And they're really the head of where those resources are directed. But we partnered with the county to have a specific team that focuses on Richmond and San Pablo. So that's definitely a resource that is not available throughout the entire county.
I think something that's also key is that our officers take a case management approach to mental health. So oftentimes we have repeat offenders. So instead of going back to the same house over and over again for a public disturbance or a family disturbance, they refer that resident or that individual to our mental health assessment officer. And then that officer could go back when the person is not in crisis and try to deal with them then. It may be a housing issue, maybe an employment issue, maybe a substance abuse issue. So they try to look at it as an individual and address their needs.
Thank you both on that. And, that's a big question that we get asked a lot. A lot of what we do is working alongside other parallel agencies to do help with coordination with the homeless, with mentally ill folks and those who are consumers, because we know that the partnership helps strengthen what we're able to do, because some of these things are things that ended up in the police department's lap because of things that go on in society. So partnering with those organizations is really important. There's another important question that I wanted to ask, and this could be for the chief or anybody on the command staff, and I think we get it a lot, is it comes from Mike Parker. What do you mean by community policing? And we get that question a lot. What does community policing actually mean? And why can't it continue with a reduced police budget? So I just throw that out to anyone on the panel.
So as the Operations Bureau Commander overseeing the patrol division, I probably see the most of these types of issues when it involves community policing. And what that really means is really just engaging with the community. Oftentimes, police officers may think they know what the problem is in your community, but we won't know unless we actually go out there and talk to you about what your issues are. So it's engaging with you. It's being really the coordinators and facilitators to solving problems. Oftentimes, community members will call the police department about a problem, which really isn't a law enforcement problem, but our part is to engage with the other stakeholders in order to help solve your problems. And that's something that's very unique to our agency, and you won't find it in many other agencies, and I think that's what makes us one of the most premier law enforcement agencies in the state.
Thank you, Captain. Chief, did you want to respond to that question?
Sure. I think, like I said earlier, one of the important things to note is, community policing, and like Captain Wyatt said, everything we do is ingrained in community policing, but the overtime part of it is so that we can really be present and focused on whatever event that we're at. And so I know a lot of people don't understand that we just don't have a team standing by to go to community events. They have another job and function to do, whether they're in patrol or investigations. We don't have the luxury of just having a team that can respond to these events. So therefore, when they're not working, when they're not on patrol, or when they're not in investigations, then they choose, actually, we a lot of times we post overtime assignments for these events, and they choose to come in to to participate in these events because they want to be involved in non-enforcement ways with our community, because that's how we build trust and relationships and partnerships.
Thank you guys for those responses. So let's get to some more questions. We want to answer as many questions as we can. I've peeked into the Q&A. There's some great questions there. If we're not able to answer them all, this is the beginning of a dialogue. We're going to continue to have these kinds of interactions and ways for you to get your questions across and be able to interact. So we're taking down all that information. And if you want to be contacted with follow-up, we definitely will follow up. But I also encourage all the panelists to feel free to jump in there and answer questions in the Q&A when you have an opportunity as well. The next question is actually from BK, and it is directed towards Chief French. Thinking about the current efforts and the new effort to the new public safety paradigm, how will you respond as a Black woman, as a mother, as a pioneer, and as an insider who knows the strengths and weaknesses of the department? What does public safety look like under your leadership, and how can we hold you accountable for the actions of your officers? And that comes from BK.
All right. Well, I think I'm uniquely situated as a Black and Latino woman uniquely situated in that I understand the concerns of the community in terms of the reimagining or, police reform, because not only am I a police officer, but when I take this uniform off, I'm also a Black and Latino woman. So I understand the concerns. And so, like I said, I'm uniquely situated to really address these concerns with my department. I think we have a great department, though. And I'll knock on wood, but you don't see kind of what's going on nationwide in these other communities happening here in Richmond. And that's because we really focused on building community relationships. We focused on training our officers, doing exceptional training, de-escalation. We were one of the first in the nation to start de-escalation training here. So what I imagine is that we actually are the model, and we continue to be a model for policing in America, that people will look to us to see that we have really partnered with our community. And I know we have some work to do in terms of, past harm and looking at how we really have some difficult conversations around past harm here in our community between police and community. And we're looking forward to having those conversations, because that's how I think that the only way we can grow and move forward is if we address the things that are really on the community's mind, and that people are challenged with moving forward with the relationship. We have to address those things so that we can move forward in a positive way.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. So our next question can go to any of the panelists, and it comes from Sona. So what are some of the short-term goals for Richmond in regards to crime prevention? And are there some new strategies or policies in place to address officers who are coping with stress? So it's kind of a two-part question, and it can go to Chief or anybody on the panel.
I'll take a stab at that one. To address the second part of that question or concern is, what are we doing to help officers cope with stress? Well, we recently worked with an outside company called Cortigo that actually is a first responder based psychological counseling company that deals with first responders, and they developed an application that brings resources right to the department's smartphone. It's an application that they've downloaded, and on that application they have available to them resources that deal with anger management and substance abuse and marriage and family counseling and grief, dealing with grief and stress, and I mean, on and on and on and on that list goes. And also in that application are links to all of the department's peer support. We have a cadre of both sworn and civilian personnel here at the department that are trained in peer support, and their contact is on there, along with actual clinicians. Their contact information is on there. So it's really a resource that we now have put in every employee's hand, that they have access to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where if they need help or they need to reach out to somebody, that they have that resource available to them. It's confidential, and it's been promoted from the chief all the way on down to the patrol sergeants to get people feeling comfortable with reaching out for help. Once upon a time, it was taboo for a police officer to say, I need help. The culture we have here now in Richmond PD is we want people to feel that it's normal to reach out to somebody when they've encountered something that is beyond what a regular person should have to see or deal with. And because that's at the end of the day, police officers, we're human. We're not machines. The things we see and deal with on a regular basis can add up. And so having that resource in everybody's hand is a huge step towards helping them manage that stress level.
Thank you. And did anybody want to talk about the first part of that question? Is there any kind of thing new in terms of some of our short-term goals about dealing with crime prevention?
Well, I think, well, for right now, some that you may or may not know is that we actually hold monthly crime accountability meetings where the chief convenes a meeting with all the patrol captains, the area commanders, the watch commanders, and we talk about the crime trends in the community. So we do have a full-time crime prevention unit, as you may already know. We also have a full-time crime analyst that could tell us about trends in crime. Unfortunately, we don't have a crime analysis assistant, so that's another challenge that we didn't really talk too much about that we need. Our CCTV program, we're trying to civilianize it. Hopefully that will be key to getting more eyes on like 23rd Street. Right now we're having a problem with the Greenway Trail. We're hoping to add cameras there in the future to expand that for public dumping. So those are some issues that we're working on to help solve crime.
Thank you both for those responses. And there's not a day that goes by that we don't hear about illegal dumping, or we hear about, traffic and speeding concerns. I have quite a few questions about traffic and speeding that are listed here by several different people. So does anybody want to address how the police department is addressing issues of traffic, speeding, donuts, sideshows, those kinds of things? Because those are something that we see over and over again in all of the questions.
Well, some of our staffing challenges, again, also have affected traffic. We used to have 8 traffic officers. Now we only have 4 traffic officers. One of our biggest traffic complaints is on the Dam Road. So our B9 officers, we've actually sent them to radar and LiDAR school so they could actually use those as tools to do more traffic enforcement. And Chief, I don't know if you want to add more to that.
I was actually going to say, we had, a whole team of traffic officers, and now we're down to 4. And like I said before, traffic is a huge complaint that we receive across the city. So we're doing our best with the amount of resources we have. We actually went after a grant, traffic grant, which we received over $200,000, and that will include some money to do some enforcement on overtime, which it always helps out too. So, and it won't, impact the city's budget. So we're also doing a lot of that work on overtime.
Okay, thank you. Going a little back to some of the visioning questions, I got a question from Dawn, and she wants to know, what is the vision of supporting the youth of Richmond from the perspective of the police department and the leadership?
This is a huge topic of conversation for us here at the police department because, as most of you probably know, the school district is not renewing their contract with us, and that's really going to hit us hard because that's where we actually made a lot of formed a lot of partnerships. That's where we formed a lot of relationships with young people, and really you're there at the schools for long periods of time. You can build that trust. And through that trust, young people came to our school resource officers and provided a lot of information that helped to keep them safe. So for example, if there was somebody on the school grounds with a gun, you know, a lot of times we found out that information because somebody, you know, saw it or, you know, heard about it and went over to the school resource officer and said, hey, you might want to check out so-and-so. And they were able to, you know, safely get that gun or weapon off of that student and not result in a shooting or something like that. Where now, you know, officers off the street that don't have any relationships with the students in school will be responding to those calls, and they won't have those relationships where they can call somebody out and they already have some respect between the officer and the student. And so we're concerned about that moving forward. We're looking at different ways to connect. We're going to continue with our diversion program. So our goal is to not put kids into the criminal justice system. We know it's a system that has challenges and is broken, and we don't want to send kids there unless we have to, absolutely have to. And so our diversion program is an 8-week program where we if a young person offends and has a misdemeanor case or something like that, we can send them to diversion. They complete the program, and then we don't send that case to juvenile probation for filing. And so we want to do more of that work. Also working with CAL and other agencies that serve young people, because I think that there is room for us to have relationships with the young people. It's going to be more difficult without the SRO program, but we're going to look at every opportunity possible to connect, because they are the future. And I know that we have the ability to provide resources that they're not getting from a lot of different areas. And that's what we were doing as SROs in the schools, you know, combining all the resources that we have to be able to, you know, set young people up for success as opposed to failure. And so we're just going to look for every opportunity that we can to continue to do that.
Thank you so much, Chief. Important, because you can't make connections in a crisis. And, you know, a lot of times first responders are responding in crisis. So those relationships mean a lot when you come on the scene. A couple more questions.
Going back to that for a second, Michelle, you know, we were able to divert a lot of people from the criminal justice system in the schools because we were able to take the time to actually get to the root cause of issues when we were in the school. So if there was a fight, you know, we could sit the students down, call them family members or parents or whoever, and have a real discussion that might take hours or even days to complete. And the school resource officers had the time and the resources to do that. Now, again, when officers are responding and they're responding to different calls for service, and then they have to go to the school, they don't have hours or even days to pull everybody to the table and find, you know, solutions to those problems that young people are experiencing. So, you know, this is a huge, the SRO program is a huge loss for us.
Thank you for answering that question. I want to make sure, because we're coming to the end of our time, and I want to do a couple more questions, if you all can bear with me for a few more moments. We got started a little bit after time. And this is a question that's come over and over again, because obviously it's fire season, and though the air quality might be a little bit better today, we've been dealing with a tremendous impact from fires all across the region. So this is from, for those of us who live near Castro Ranch Road, Joni writes, there is a huge concern about escape routes in the event of wildfires. Can you help in any way to get the city of Richmond and other applicable public entities to prepare for the designated escape routes? And that's from Joni. So I'm going to turn that over to anyone on the panel. I know Captain YA is actually our specialist there, so feel free to respond.
Hi, so I'm the department's liaison to the city's Office of Emergency Services, and that's something that they've been planning really. Genevieve Pastor-Cohen, the manager, has been really planning this for years now. So there is a plan in place. I know there's some stuff that are going on social media about there not being a plan. I've seen the plan. There is a plan. So often people ask, well, what's my escape route? And really the answer is all depends, right? Depending on whether the fire shifts. But really right now, the biggest egress point is going to be San Pablo Dam Road. We'll have officers out there to block the roads to make it a one-way counter road, so everyone get out of May Valley, Carriage Hills area. We have plans to bring in buses if we have to bus people out. I think the biggest challenge right now that we're seeing is there's not a whole lot of people that are registered with the community warning system. So if you're not registered with the community warning system, make sure you get your cell phone registered. That way they can send you notices, because not everyone's on Nixle. So make sure you're registered to the community warning system. That could be the biggest thing to help. Also, probably have some type of landline. Most people nowadays don't have landlines. Now, during the last power safety shutoff, the cell phone towers went out because their battery backups only last several hours. So in the case of a wildfire, if those cell phone towers are damaged, you only have a cell phone to communicate with, we may not be able to give you the evacuation routes that you need to abide by. So that would be very helpful for us.
Thank you, Captain Wyatt. That's a question that we've been getting asked all week. We sent out some information about the community warning system, but one of the things we're hoping to do is follow up with all of you all about your neighborhood concerns and make sure you connect with the right person in the department. It may not be something that we deal with alone. Also, I've reached out to Richmond Fire, and so it might be something where we can plan some kind of a community meeting to share that information with you and your neighbors. So we'd be happy to work with you guys on that. One final question I wanted to make sure that I got to, and this has to do with neighborhood safety as well. This is from Vonnie. Vonnie writes, I live on South 19th between Florida and Ohio. My concern has to do with the speeding cars down South 19th Street, not stopping at the stop sign. It's a danger zone. I am not asking for a police officer to be physically present, but can you please park a police car as a deterrent? Maybe one of you guys want to talk about deterrence, ways that we can slow traffic, traffic calming, how we work with other entities in the city, that kind of thing.
So our community problems shift throughout the city. It could be on a daily basis. So it's important that you notify us about what's occurring. I know that our crime prevention unit recently did a community survey, and it was surprisingly, I think over 50% of the people didn't know what beat they lived in. So if you know what your beat is, go on our department website, email us what your problems are, and the area commanders all ensure that they're addressing your concerns. Now, it may be a decoy car that might work. It may be actually motor officers out there. So we'll have to really take a look at what the problems are, time of day, what our staffing levels are, so we could address it appropriately. But please call us and let us know what your issues are. We always want to hear from the public.
And at this time, I want to thank Mandy because she's dropped a lot of things in the chat, the information about the community warning system, how to email RPD community so that we can all be connected. So thank you so much for doing that. What we're going to do is we'll get a little transcript of everybody whose question was in the chat. And if there was a question that we weren't able to answer, during the Zoom call, we'll try to follow up with you to make sure that we get your question answered. But this is part of a dialogue. We have to continue to work on this over time. It's part of something that we have to continue to do and continue to have this conversation. So I want to, first of all, appreciate everybody who took their time out to listen to the Zoom. There's a million things you could be doing, and there's a lot of forums on community police relationships, what reimagining policing looks like, how we handle, ourselves as a department and as communities with public safety in a time of decreased resources when many of our communities have always been under-resourced, and how we work together to come up with common vision. Because at the end of the day, we all are on the airplane together. So I just wanted to thank everybody for participating, and I'd like to give everybody on the panel a few last words. I did this at the end of our forum with the NAACP, and I'm going to do it again. If you could share your hope for the department and for the Richmond community, and maybe share very briefly, what did you do before you were a police officer? I'll start with the chief.
Thank you everyone for joining today. Michelle, I already forgot your questions.
It's all right. What did you do before you were a police officer, and what's your hope for the department?
All right, so before I was a police officer, I was a single mom, and I was working first. I worked at the district attorney's office collecting child support as a temporary employee. And before that, I worked at Sears at Hilltop Mall. My hope is that we can really get on the same page. I don't think that we're far off, but my hope is that we really connect with our community and move forward together in a way that is going to be beneficial to everyone. that's my hope moving forward. And before we close, actually, I want to thank Michelle and Mandy for running the meeting and answering the questions and moderating. Michelle always does a great job. And then I also want to, when we close this meeting in remembrance of Sergeant Virgil Thomas, who we lost last week to COVID. A great man, a great officer, and he will be deeply missed.
Thank you, Chief. Captain Simmons.
Prior to my law enforcement career, I worked with youth in local churches. That was a full-time job, and then I transitioned into pharmacy. I've worked several years for hospitals and local community pharmacies, and then transitioned into law enforcement. My hope for this city is the definition of community that I subscribe to is a group of like-minded people. And I hope that through this process and this time period that we're going through now and in future ones, we can continue to become like-minded. The police department and the community, it's not two sides of the coin. It's just us together. We are the coin, and wanting to merge our priorities and work more to understand each other and our perspectives and continue to become like-minded. And when we do that, needs will be met. Crime will be impacted in a positive way. So that's my hope for the future as we continue this discussion.
Thank you, Captain. Captain Wye.
So I joined the Marine Corps after high school and went to college, and then actually attended the Citizens Academy here in Richmond. That's how I got recruited to become a police officer, and I've been here for 22 years. So my hope is that you get to know who your officers are. Policing is a noble profession, regardless of what you're hearing right now in the media. Officers here come to work day after day. Their service is selfless. They sacrifice a lot every day, especially right now during COVID-19. Right now, through the death of Sergeant Thomas, I mean, it's hard to come to work every day, but people still come and do it. And they still put their lives on the line for you every day. So get to know your officers, get to know your area commanders. I tell them all the time, hey, you guys have the responsibility for what's occurring on the streets. I ultimately have ultimate responsibility, but get to know them, give them an opportunity to work with your problems, and also get to know your officers. And thanks again for joining this forum.
Thank you, Captain. Captain Tyrona.
Well, before becoming a police officer, I am a first-generation American. So immigrated here from the Philippines when I was a child and got sworn in as a U.S. citizen at the age of 16, one of the proudest days of my life. I was a student. I taught martial arts. I built bicycles. Got into this job as honestly kind of a lark, but actually found my calling. That finding police work, especially in the city of Richmond, has been nothing but a positive and rewarding experience. I started here just shy of 27 years ago and saw Richmond at its peak in terms of violent crime, and have seen the steady positive progress the city has made. And so I'm very proud of the city, what it's become, what it's becoming, and have very high hopes for the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Captain. She's being put on the spot because she's always in the background being excellent, but I'm just going to ask Mandy, you don't have to turn your camera on. What did you do before you got into this career, and what is your hope?
Sorry, I was responding to somebody. Before I was with the department, I was working in restaurants and in retail. But I've always had a strong love for community. Got that from my mama. And so, yeah, my hope is that, we can continue to have partnerships with the community, with businesses. And I look forward to the future.
Thank you, Mandy. And before we close out, before I came to work for the department, I started my workout at Girls Inc. I was a program instructor, grew up at the Girls Club on 260 Broadway, and I ended up working there. I worked for the state assembly for a while. I worked in politics for a while in the mayor's office, but I'm proud to be here serving Richmond as my hometown. And I can't imagine any better place to be than right here with all of you. So thank you all for joining us. I want to thank our Crime Prevention Board that helps us make this happen. They're a group of citizens that are always out here doing the work. Everyone, I don't want to call names because I'm going to start forgetting names, and I don't want to forget any names, but I want to thank all of them. And if you'd like to reach out to them, maybe Carla, you can drop your email and Al's email in the chat so that you can connect with them. They are a great resource. And as we close out this meeting, I'd like to close it out in memory, if we could have a moment of silence for Sergeant Virgil Thomas, who we lost to COVID-19. Thank you, and thank you for joining us.